The sky was burning red, filled with smoke and fire. Explosions echoed in every direction, shaking the ground like angry giants. Bodies of soldiers, both human and alien, lay scattered across the battlefield. The war between humans and the alien race called the Drevians had reached its deadliest stage. Neither side showed mercy. It was a battle for survival, for honor, and for control of the planet Khazar 5 in the middle of the chaos. Solara, the alien warrior, fought bravely. She was a Drevian's elite fighter. Her skills with twin energy blades were unmatched. Her armor was cracked, her body bleeding. But she refused to fall. Her clan called her the Unbreakable. She had earned that name through countless victories, but fate had other plans for her. Today, without warning, a human airstrike swept across the battlefield. Massive bombs fell like metal rain. Solara tried to run, but one explosion was too close. The ground beneath her feet shattered, and a piece of burning debris crashed onto her legs. She screamed in pain as the weight crushed her limbs. Her legs were broken, twisted, useless. She was pinned and helpless, trapped under rubble, her vision blurred. But she could still hear her people. She called out to them, "Help! I'm here! I'm alive!" She shouted, but the Drevians were retreating, their forces too weak to hold the ground. They had already marked the area as lost. To them, anyone left behind was dead. Even a warrior like Solara was not worth the risk. Zalara's heart filled with rage and sorrow. She had given everything to her clan, her people, her war, and now they abandoned her without a second thought. She pounded the rubble with her fists, trying to free herself, but her strength was fading. The pain was too much. Hours passed, and the battlefield grew silent. She was alone, completely alone. The sky turned darker, smoke still rising from the burnt land. Solara stared up, her breathing shallow. This is how it ends, she thought, left to rot, to die slowly. Her pride hurt more than her broken body. She didn't fear death. She hated being discarded like trash. But then, she heard footsteps, heavy, steady boots crunching on dirt. And Ash, someone was nearby. Her senses sharpened. Was it a Drevian scout? A rescue party? Or worse, a human soldier looking to finish the job? She reached for a broken blade near her hand. Even half dead, she would not die without a fight. The footsteps came closer, and soon a shadow stood over her. She looked up with fierce eyes. It was a human, tall, wearing heavy combat armor, his face rough and scarred. His name was Sergeant Blake, a human Marine left behind during the same battle. Blake raised his rifle, ready to shoot when he saw the alien warrior. He knew she was a killer, an enemy, but something stopped him. He saw her condition, legs crushed, blood everywhere, eyes burning with defiance. She was beaten but not broken. She held her blade, even though she could barely lift it. Blake remembered his own past. His unit once left him behind on a different planet. He had survived by luck, but the feeling of betrayal had never left his heart. Looking at Solara, he saw that same pain, the pain of being abandoned by those you trusted. He lowered his rifle. Solara watched, confused. "Go ahead, human." She spat. "Finish me, I'm ready." But Blake shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not going to kill someone who refuses to give up." She didn't understand. Why would an enemy spare her? What was his plan? Blake looked around and started clearing the rubble from her legs. Solara winced and growled in pain. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. Blake didn't answer right away. He just said, "Because I know what it feels like to be left behind." When he pulled the last piece of metal away, her legs were a terrible sight, crushed beyond repair. Blake knew she couldn't walk, not like this. But he couldn't leave her to die, so he used his gear to build a rough stretcher from broken parts and his own cloak. Carefully, he lifted Solara onto it. She was light, but her body was damaged. She bit her lip to hide the pain. "Don't think I'm grateful," she hissed. Blake chuckled softly. "Didn't expect you to be," he replied. Then he began to pull the stretcher across the battlefield. Every step was dangerous. But Blake was determined. Solara lay silently, watching the human, his strength, his stubbornness. She had no idea why he was doing this, but deep inside, a part of her, the part that was still a warrior, respected him for it. As night fell, the two enemies moved together through the ashes of war, neither knowing if they would survive. But one thing was certain, their story had just begun. The cold wind swept over the dead land as Blake dragged the stretcher slowly. The ground was uneven, littered with bodies, metal scraps, and blackened craters. Every pull of the stretcher made his muscles scream, but he didn't stop. He looked down at Solara from time to time. She lay still, her breathing shallow, her eyes half closed even though she was injured. Her face carried pride. She didn't beg, she didn't complain. She just stared at the sky, lost in her own pain and shame. Blake knew she hated being weak. He could feel her anger, not at him, but at herself, and at her people who abandoned her. After a while, Solara spoke weakly. "Why are you doing this, human?" Blake paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Because I've been there," he said. "Left behind, forgotten." "I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even an enemy," Solara scoffed. "You're a fool," Blake gave a tired grin. "Yeah, I've been called worse." Then he kept moving. Each step was harder than the last. His supplies were running low, and he was starting to limp from an old wound. The planet was unforgiving. Blake knew the temperature would drop soon, and the night brought creatures that hunted the weak. He needed shelter, or both of them would die before morning. After hours of dragging, he spotted a ridge ahead. Beneath it was a collapsed bunker, half buried in dirt and stone. It wasn't much, but it would shield them from the cold winds and predators. Blake dragged Solara inside the ruined bunker. He found a corner where the walls still stood strong. There, he laid her down carefully. Her face was pale, her breathing uneven. She had lost too much blood. Blake searched his pack, pulling out a small medkit. He didn't know much about Drevian biology, but blood was blood. He cleaned her wounds as best he could, wrapping her legs with bandages and sealing deep cuts with gel. Solara flinched but didn't cry out. She watched him silently, studying his every move. When he was done, Blake collapsed beside her. Exhausted, his body ached, his throat was dry, but he refused to sleep yet. He set up small motion sensors around the bunker entrance. If anything approached, he'd know. Solara finally broke the silence. "You'll get yourself killed for nothing," she whispered. Blake stared at the broken ceiling above them. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm not leaving you." She didn't understand him. Her people would have left a human to rot without a second thought. Why was he different? What did he gain from saving her? Blake turned his head slightly to look at her. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then replied, "Solara." "Of the Kerez clan," Blake nodded. "Blake, Sergeant Blake Harper, United Earth Marines." They stared at each other for a moment. Two enemies caught in the same hell. But something had changed. They were no longer soldier and enemy. They were just two beings trying to survive. Solara's mind wrestled with her pride and reality. She wanted to hate him, but he was the only reason she was still breathing. Hours passed, night fell, and the air grew colder. Blake gathered what little debris he could to make a small fire. The weak flame cast a soft glow, pushing back the dark. In that dim light, Solara spoke again. "My people will kill me if they see me like this." Aided by a human, Blake raised an eyebrow. "Guess we're both screwed then," he chuckled. "But I'm not planning to die here, and neither are you." Solara shook her head slowly. "You don't know them. Failure is worse than death." "To my clan," Blake looked serious. "Then let's make sure you don't fail." She turned her head to him, curious. "What do you mean?" Blake smiled faintly. "I'll get you back on your feet somehow. You're not done fighting yet." His words sparked a tiny ember inside her heart. A part of her still wanted to fight, still wanted to prove herself, even if her legs were gone. She wasn't dead, but doubts clouded her mind. "Even if I survive, What then? I have no legs, she muttered bitterly. Blake stared at the flickering flame. Then we find a way to fix that, he said. There's always a way. His voice carried a strange confidence. Zalara couldn't help but believe him, just a little. They were enemies, yet this human spoke as if her life mattered. It was strange, confusing, but also comforting that night, as the cold wind howled outside. Blake stayed awake, watching over Zalara. She drifted into sleep, her body too weak to resist. But before she fully slept, she whispered to herself, maybe this human is not like the others. In the heart of the battlefield, a bond was beginning to form, fragile, uncertain, but real. Neither of them knew it yet, but their fate was now tied together. And this was only the beginning of their unlikely journey. Morning light broke through the cracks in the bunker walls. The air was cold, heavy with dust and smoke. Blake opened his eyes slowly, his body stiff and sore from sleeping on the hard ground. Beside him, Zalara stirred weakly, her breathing rough but steady. She was alive, but barely. Blake sat up, stretching his arms with a groan. The sensors he set up last night hadn't been triggered. That was a relief. At least no beasts or patrols had found them. But their luck wouldn't last long. He checked his supplies. A half-empty water flask, a single protein bar, a dull combat knife, and a small pistol with 3 bullets left. Not nearly enough. They couldn't stay here. Not without food or water. Blake looked at Zalara, her eyes half open, watching him silently. We can't stay here, he said quietly. She nodded slowly, understanding the truth. If we stay, we die, she whispered. But moving her was not going to be easy. Her legs were still crushed, her body weak. Blake needed a plan. He scouted outside the bunker first, careful with every step. The land was empty, a dead wasteland stretching for miles. No sign of soldiers, but predator tracks in the dirt reminded him that the wildlife was still a threat. When he returned, Zalara was trying to sit up, her arms shaking from the effort. Stubborn, Blake muttered, helping her gently. She gritted her teeth, refusing to look weak. I need to move, she said. I won't be dead weight. Blake smiled faintly, impressed by her spirit. Fine, he said, but you'll need support. He looked around the bunker, gathering broken metal pipes, wires, and cloth scraps. With patience, he fashioned crude splints and braces for her legs. They weren't perfect, but they kept her limbs straight and stable. Next, he built a makeshift harness that would allow her to be partly carried, but still keep her upper body mobile. Zalara watched him work, her pride wounded. She was a warrior. She wasn't used to being this helpless, yet the human didn't mock her. He worked silently, like a soldier with a mission. By midday, Blake had her geared up as best as he could. He helped her stand, his arms under hers. She groaned in pain, sweat beading on her forehead. But she stood, shaky but upright. Not bad, she muttered. Blake chuckled. You'll be running in no time. She gave him a sharp look, but her lips curled slightly, the closest thing to a smile. They left the bunker, moving slowly. Blake supported most of her weight, but she insisted on using her arms to help push forward. Every step was painful for her, but she never cried out. Land around them was a graveyard of war. Twisted metal, shattered weapons, bones both human and alien. They moved during the day, resting only when Zalara was close to collapsing. At night, Blake lit small fires hidden in pits to avoid drawing attention. He stood guard while Zalara rested, though his eyes grew heavy from exhaustion. One night, Zalara woke to find Blake staring at the dark horizon. His shoulders were tense, his eyes alert. What do you see? She asked, her voice dry. Movement, he said, but not soldiers. Something else. Moments later, the sound of low growls echoed through the night. Blake grabbed his pistol, aiming into the shadows. 2 glowing eyes appeared, then 4, then 6. A pack of wild predators, their bodies low to the ground. Hungry and fast, Blake stood in front of Zalara, shielding her. But he had only 3 bullets, not enough. He fired once. hitting the lead beast between the eyes. It dropped, but the others didn't stop. Solara pushed herself up, grabbing a sharp piece of metal nearby. Her arms still had strength. She yelled, drawing one of the creatures closer when it lunged. She stabbed the metal shard into its throat, twisting with all her might. The beast fell, gurgling. Blake shot another, then used his knife when one leapt too close. They fought back to back, alien and human, bleeding, panting, but standing together. When the last beast fell, the night was silent again. Both of them were injured, but alive. Blake looked at her, breathing hard. "You're not bad for someone with crushed legs." He joked. Solara smirked weakly. "And you're not useless for a human," she replied. They both chuckled. A strange warmth between them despite the blood and dirt. Their struggle had become more than just survival. They were learning to trust each other. As dawn approached, Solara stared at the rising light. "Blake," she said softly. "Yeah? If we get out of this, you'll have my respect." Blake smiled tiredly. "Good enough for me." Their journey was far from over, but now, they were no longer just enemies trapped together. They were partners in survival, and together, they would face whatever the wasteland threw at them next. The sun was harsh the next day. The heat made the air shimmer like a ghostly haze. Blake and Solara moved slowly across the barren land. Both were exhausted, bruised, and bleeding, but they couldn't stop. Stopping meant death, whether by hunger, predators, or soldiers. Blake knew they were getting closer to the war zones again. The distant sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed now and then. But that wasn't their only problem. His tracker, half broken, flashed with occasional signals. Drevian patrols were moving, and so were human squads, if humans found them. Blake would be branded a traitor for helping an alien if Drevians found them. Solara would be punished for being touched by a human. They were enemies in the eyes of both sides. There was no one coming to rescue them. Solara knew this too. She sat resting under the shade of a cracked boulder, watching Blake repair his broken pistol. "You know they'll kill us both if we're caught," she said bluntly. Blake didn't look up. "I know," he replied, "but we'll stay ahead of them." Solara looked away, her fists clenching. She hated feeling weak. Once she was feared, now she was barely surviving with the help of a human. Her pride burned like a hidden fire, but so did her desire to live. Then in the distance, movement caught her sharp eyes. "Blake, look," she whispered. Blake grabbed his binoculars and scanned the horizon. His heart sank. A human patrol, 6 soldiers, armed and scanning the area. If they spotted him with Solara, they'd shoot first and ask questions later. "We need to move now," Blake said quickly. He helped Solara up, securing her makeshift harness. They stumbled behind rocky outcrops, trying to stay low and out of sight. Blake's mind raced. He knew the patrol routes, but the wasteland had changed. After the last battle, suddenly, a sharp sound buzzed near his ear. A sniper round too close. They were spotted. "Move!" Blake shouted, pulling Solara along. Gunfire erupted, bullets striking the rocks around them. Solara grabbed a loose metal rod, using it as a crutch to push herself faster. Her body screamed in pain, but she refused to fall. They found shelter behind a collapsed tank, its hull scorched but sturdy. Blake fired back with his pistol, taking down one soldier, but he was low on ammo. "Not enough bullets," he muttered. Solara looked at the dead soldier in the distance. "We need his weapon," she said. Blake shook his head. "I can't reach him. It's too open." She stared at Blake, then at her broken legs. "I'll distract them," she said suddenly. "What?" "No way," Blake argued. "You'll die. I'll die anyway if we stay here." She snapped. "Let me do this." Blake hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Solara grabbed a piece of sharp metal and crawled out the other side of the tank. She shouted in her language, a fierce war cry. The soldiers turned, distracted by the noise. Blake used that moment to dash forward, sliding to the dead soldier and grabbing his rifle. He rolled behind cover, loaded the weapon, and fired rapidly. 2 more soldiers went down. Zalara stabbed the leg of an approaching soldier, causing him to fall screaming. Blake finished him with a shot. Soon, the remaining enemies fell. Silence returned, broken only by the sound of their heavy breathing. Blake rushed to Zalara, who was bleeding from fresh cuts. "Stupid," he muttered, helping her sit. "Brave, but stupid." She smirked weakly. "Still alive, aren't I?" Blake chuckled despite himself. "You're tougher than you look." "And you're slower than I thought," she replied. They both laughed, a strange connection growing between them, even in this deadly game. But then Blake's tracker blinked again, this time read, "Defied Patrol." "Coming fast," he muttered. Zalara's eyes darkened. "My people," she whispered. "If they see me with you, they'll execute me without hesitation." Blake scanned the bodies of the dead humans. "We need disguises," he said. Quickly gathered pieces of armor and cloth, covering his own armor with enemy gear. For Zalara, he smeared human blood and dirt on her skin to hide her Defied features partially. It wasn't perfect, but it would buy them a little time. As the Defied patrol approached, Zalara's body tensed. She could hear their language, their footsteps, her people. "But strangers now," Blake whispered. "Let me do the talking." The patrol stopped near them. Weapons raised, Blake lifted his hands, pretending to be a scavenger. But the leader wasn't fooled easily. "What is that beside you?" The Defied officer barked, pointing at Zalara. Blake's heart pounded. "She's a captive," he lied. "A trade for my survival," the officer sneered. "No Defiants are left alive here." He stepped closer, gun pointed at Zalara's head. Zalara stared back, her eyes sharp and proud even in disguise. Any wrong word, and the officer would kill her. Blake's mind raced. They were moments from death. But then Zalara spoke, her voice cold and commanding. "You dare speak to a Karez elite that way?" She growled. The officer froze, shocked. Zalara continued. "I was undercover, wounded but alive, and you will show respect." Her acting was fierce, her pride real. The patrol hesitated, confused. Blake played along, pushing her sly. The Defied patrol led Blake and Zalara through the ruined wasteland. Their weapons stayed aimed at the two of them, especially Zalara. Though she had fooled the patrol leader with her fierce words, Blake knew it was only a matter of time before their lie was uncovered. Zalara walked slowly, every step a battle against pain. Her crushed legs were barely supported by the metal braces Blake had made. Each movement sent sharp jolts through her body, but she kept her head high, her eyes proud. She would not show weakness. Not in front of her people. Blake walked beside her, pretending to be a prisoner handler. His heart raced with every step. If they reached the Defiant base, their trick would fail. The moment they scanned his identity or looked closer at Zalara's wounds, both would be dead. They needed a way out, fast. But for now, Blake stayed quiet, watching, waiting for a chance. As they marched, the patrol soldiers whispered in their alien tongue. Zalara caught bits of their conversation. They spoke of the Defiant command planning to abandon this region entirely. They had suffered heavy losses, and soon, the planet would be left to the humans. That meant one thing: if they reached the base, Blake would surely be executed. And Zalara? She'd likely face public dishonor or worse, death by her own people's hands. Her chest tightened with that thought. Her whole life had been about honor, strength, victory. Now she was a crippled warrior escorted like a failure after hours of walking. The patrol decided to camp for the night. Blake and Zalara were tied to a metal stake driven into the ground. The ropes were tight, but Blake kept his mind calm. He whispered, "We won't survive their base. We need to escape before morning." Zalara looked at the guards sitting near a fire, their weapons resting on their laps. She nodded. "Agreed. But how?" Blake looked at the ropes, the knots, the terrain. Then he smiled slightly. "I've escaped worse." While the guards laughed and ate, Blake began rubbing his ropes against a jagged piece of rock hidden under the dirt. Slowly, carefully, the rope began to fray. Zalara watched, impressed by his patience. "You humans Always full of surprises, she whispered. Blake smirked. We're stubborn like that. It took an hour. But finally, the rope snapped. Blake moved quickly, freeing Zalara's hands next. Her body was weak, but her mind was sharp. Go, she whispered. I'll slow you down. Blake shook his head firmly. Not leaving you. She looked at him, puzzled. Why? I'm not your kind. Why risk yourself? Blake paused, looking straight into her eyes. Because after all we've been through, you're more than an alien to me. You're a fighter like me, and I don't leave my squad behind. His words struck deep inside her, in her culture. Only clan bonds mattered, yet this human had forged a bond stronger than blood. She didn't understand it, but she respected it. They crawled away from the camp, staying low and quiet. Blake helped carry her weight, her arm over his shoulder. They moved slowly, the night hiding their escape. But luck was not fully on their side. One of the guards noticed their absence and shouted in alarm. Blake cursed, pulling Zalara faster. Shots rang out behind them, lasers burning the dirt nearby. Suddenly, Zalara stopped, grabbing a fallen metal beam. She swung it with both arms, striking the guard that came too close, her strength surprised. Even herself, her body weak, yet her spirit burning. Blake fired the stolen rifle, hitting another soldier. They fought side by side again, their bond tested in fire. Together, they pushed through the patrol. Using the darkness as cover, by the time dawn approached, they had escaped into the rocky cliffs. They collapsed under a hidden overhang. Panting, bleeding, but alive, Blake lay on his back, staring at the sky turning pale blue. Zalara sat beside him, her body trembling from exhaustion. Why? Why save me again? She asked softly. Blake turned his head, looking at her seriously. Because you're more than a warrior, he said. You're my friend now, Zalara. And I don't abandon friends. No human had ever said that to her. Before, she felt something strange in her chest. Warmth, not pride, not duty, but connection. You are an unusual human, she said quietly. Blake smiled faintly. And you're the most stubborn alien I've met. They both laughed softly in the middle of war. Pain and betrayal. They had found trust, not through their races, not through orders, but through struggle, respect, and the will to survive. Zalara looked at the distant mountains. We need to head there, she said. There's an old supply cache from my clan. If it's still there, we can get tools, maybe something to fix my legs. Blake nodded. Then that's where we'll go. They sat together in the quiet morning. Two warriors from different worlds, bound not by blood, but by battle, and their bond was stronger than any war. Their journey was far from over, but now they weren't just surviving, they were fighting for each other. Asterisk. The mountains stood like silent giants on the horizon, tall, cold, and covered in shadow. Blake and Zalara knew their only chance of survival rested there. Somewhere deep in those rocky walls was an old Drevian supply cache, Zalara's last hope. But the journey was brutal. The ground was steep, filled with sharp stones and narrow paths. Blake carried Zalara most of the way, his muscles aching, his breath heavy. Yet every time he thought of stopping, he remembered the promise in his heart. He wouldn't leave her, no matter the cost. Days passed. Their food was gone, water was low, but then, as they turned a sharp corner in the cliffs, Zalara spotted a symbol carved into the stone. Her eyes widened. That's it. The cache is close, she whispered. Blake smiled faintly, relief washing over him. They pressed forward, deeper into a hidden cavern. Inside, under layers of dust and rock, they found old crates marked with Drevian symbols. Zalara crawled forward, her fingers brushing over the symbols. She pressed a sequence, and with a soft hiss, one crate opened. Inside were supplies, energy cells, rations, tools, even a basic medical kit. Blake quickly tended to Zalara's wounds, cleaning her cuts and giving her water. But most important of all, they found an exoframe, a mechanical device designed to assist injured warriors. Zalara stared at it in awe. It's primitive, "But it can help me walk again," she said. Blake worked for hours, fixing the exoframe to fit her body. He tightened bolts, adjusted straps, powered the weak energy core. Finally, with his help, Zalara stood, her legs still damaged, but the frame supporting her weight. She took one shaky step, then another. A grin formed on her face. "I can walk," she said proudly. Blake laughed. "Told you we'd find a way." Their small victory was cut short by the sound of voices echoing through the cavern. Blake's smile faded. Zalara's face hardened. "They found us," she whispered. The Drevian patrol that had chased them had tracked their trail, but it wasn't just them. Blake's human squad, alerted by trackers, had also arrived from the other side. Both sides surrounded the cavern. Blake and Zalara stood back to back, weapons raised. Trapped between humans and Drevians, both shouting threats, a human soldier called out, "Step away from the alien, Blake. You're a traitor." On the other side, the Drevian officer growled, "Zalara of Caress, you've disgraced your blood. Prepare to die with your human filth." Blake looked at Zalara. "We're surrounded," he said. Zalara's eyes burned with fire. "Then we fight," she replied. "Together." Blake grinned. "Damn right." The enemies charged. Blake fired his stolen rifle, taking down the first human who tried to shoot him. Zalara, her body boosted by the exoframe, moved faster than she had in weeks. She swung a heavy metal rod, smashing into the chest of a Drevian soldier, sending him crashing into the wall. They fought like warriors with nothing to lose. Blake's movements were sharp, precise. Zalara was fierce, her strikes heavy and deadly. Despite their strength, the numbers were too great. Blake was shot in the side, blood pouring from the wound. He stumbled, but Zalara caught him, her arm steady. She roared in her language, "You want me dead? Come take me." Her defiance shook the Drevians. They remembered her as the unbreakable. And now she stood again, even broken, even shamed. She still fought like a queen. Blake leaned on her, his vision blurry. "You're something else, Zalara," he muttered. She smiled briefly. "So are you, human." But the enemy was closing in. Blake's ammo was gone. Zalara's body weakening. Then from above, a sound thundered, engines roaring. A massive ship hovered over the cavern. A mercenary craft, independent fighters who watched wars for profit. They had picked up the battle signals and arrived. Weapons aimed at both sides. "Stand down or be vaporized." The mercenary captain's voice boomed. The soldiers froze, neither human nor Drevian wanting to risk death. Blake and Zalara looked up, hope sparking in their tired eyes. A rope dropped. A mercenary lowered and waved. "Come with us if you want to live," he shouted. Blake grabbed the rope, helping Zalara climb with him. Her exoframe groaned, but she held on together. They were pulled up to the ship, leaving their enemies below. As the ship ascended, Blake collapsed on the floor, breathing hard. Zalara knelt beside him. "You're bleeding bad," she said. Blake chuckled weakly. "I've had worse." She shook her head. "You're a fool." "But you're my fool now," she whispered. Blake smiled. "Guess that makes us partners." The mercenaries treated Blake's wounds and gave Zalara proper care. For the first time, they were safe. Together, they had fought through betrayal, war, and death. Now together, they had survived the final stand. But deep inside, they both knew their story wasn't over yet. It was only the beginning. The mercenary ship cut through the sky. Inside its steel walls, Blake lay on a medical bed. Weak but breathing, his side was stitched, his body covered in bruises. Beside him sat Zalara, her exoframe removed for the first time since she stood. Again, fresh bandages wrapped her legs, and machines helped her breathe easier. For the first time in weeks, there was peace. No gunfire, no patrols, no monsters. Only the soft hum of the ship's engine. The mercenaries treated them with curiosity. They had seen many things during the war, but never a human and a Drevian warrior protecting each other. Most just stared, whispering to each other about the strange pair. Blake finally opened his eyes, his vision blurred. But he smiled weakly when he saw Zilara beside him. "You're still here," he whispered. Zilara looked at him and nodded. "Of course, human," she replied. "I made a promise, didn't I?" Blake chuckled softly. "Yeah, you did." Over the next few days, both of them healed slowly. Blake regained his strength, walking the halls of the ship with caution. Zilara, with some help, stood again. Her legs still damaged, but stronger with the medical technology the mercenaries provided. She was also given new prosthetic supports, sleek, stronger, better. With every step, her pride returned. She was no longer the broken warrior left behind. She was standing tall again. Blake watched her train in the cargo bay, swinging heavy rods, practicing her strikes. Every movement was precise. Filled with purpose, she was determined to never be weak again. Blake smiled to himself. She was back, the warrior, the fighter, but also his friend. One day, the mercenary captain called them to the command deck. He was a tall, scarred man with a deep voice. "You two caused quite a mess down there," he said with a grin. "Half the human army thinks Blake is a traitor, and the Drevians want Zilara's head." Blake and Zilara exchanged glances. "Sounds about right," Blake said with a shrug. The captain leaned forward. "But here's the thing. There are people out there who'd pay a lot to meet a human and a Drevian working together. Peace brokers, diplomats, even rebels who think this war should end." Zilara raised an eyebrow. "Why tell us this?" The captain smirked. "Because you've become a symbol, whether you like it or not." Blake frowned. "We're just survivors, not heroes." The captain shook his head. "Maybe, but stories spread fast. A human who refused to leave an enemy behind and an alien warrior who protected him. That's the kind of story people listen to." Zilara crossed her arms. "What do you want from us?" The captain smiled. "A partnership. Help us on missions where we need someone who understands both sides. You two can be more than fighters. You can be the bridge." Blake and Zilara stayed silent. They had started as enemies. They survived as allies. Now they were being offered a new path. Zilara looked at Blake. "What do you think, human?" Blake smiled faintly. "I think we've come too far to hide now." Zilara nodded. "Agreed." They shook hands with the captain, sealing their decision. Together, they would join the mercenaries, not just as fighters, but as symbols of something more. Proof that trust could exist between species that had only known war. Weeks passed. Blake and Zilara trained together, fought side by side on missions. They rescued prisoners, stopped raids, even helped negotiate ceasefires in war-torn zones. Their legend grew, the human marine and the Drevian warrior. Enemies turned comrades. Their story spread across systems, inspiring others to believe that peace wasn't impossible. One night, standing on the observation deck, Zilara looked out at the stars. She stood tall, her new mechanical legs stronger than before. Blake joined her, holding 2 cups of warmed ration drink. He handed her one. "Not as good as real coffee, but it'll do," he joked. Zilara took it, sipping carefully. "I never thought I'd be here, fighting beside a human, looking at stars instead of battlefields," she said. Blake nodded. "Life's weird that way," he said with a grin. "Sometimes